So today I'm basically just going to be talking about the work that I have made in my career as an artist, we'll say. I haven't been working that long, so it isn't that much work, but I'll try to discuss it as well as thoroughly as I can. So the work that I make is mainly interested in human interactions with their environments. At the beginning, it was human interactions with the built environment, and then later on, more so with the natural environment. I just thought I would open with this photo. It's one of the very few photos I have of a person in it, but I feel like it sort of sums up that idea of humans interacting with the natural environment. I took this photo at the Gardens in Versailles, actually, and it was too perfect. I couldn't not take a photo of this man. I will start at the very beginning, really. I became interested in photography when I was a student here at the University of Winnipeg Collegiate. We had an art program through the Winnipeg Art Gallery studio, and then we had a unit in photography over at Prairie View, which is just down on Hargrave. And that's where I was introduced to the darkroom, and I discovered my love of photography. And I think what I love most about photography is just how instant the results are. I tend to be a really impatient person, and there's just something so quick that I love about photography. I think that's really what drew me to that medium. And then when I finished high school here at the U of W, I went to the University of Manitoba, where I actually started with a focus towards architecture. And then I realized that I could study art in university, and I quickly made the switch. That's where I started making most of this work. I grew up in a small town called Oakbank, which is just about 30 minutes outside of the city. And in my first major class in photography at the U of M was with Lisa. And it was my digital photography class, and I started to photograph this town. And I started photographing it at night, and I was really interested in how the light could transform a space and a place. And it really led me to my first major series of work that I've called Interiors. But based on this interest I had with light and how it could transform a space, David McMillan, who was also an instructor of mine at the time, gave me a kit of strobe lights to take home. And for any of you who aren't familiar with strobe lights, it's just studio lighting that flashes. So I took a set of those home, and I started photographing homes of friends and family, and I was interested in a few things, mainly how I could construct and deconstruct these spatial encounters with the use of lighting and a camera. And also I discovered how a camera could provide me with the ability to control and manipulate the way that one visually perceives a space and the objects within it. And I really liked how the images sort of allowed the spaces to take on these different personalities. So again, these are all images from the majority of these images actually belong to, the home belongs to my grandparents. Unfortunately, they don't live there anymore, but I still think it's one of the most interesting spaces. And I think the majority of this work was inspired mainly by the work of Lynn Cohen, who is a Canadian photographer who unfortunately just passed away a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago. An artist that Lisa actually introduced me to, an Italian photographer named Luisa Lambri. And I also remember looking at a lot of Gregory Crutzen when I was in my very first few years of photography. His use of lighting I always really enjoyed. And I will also mention that these images were created with a digital camera to start, and then later on I switched to medium format and then large format, but I'll show you which ones those are when they come up. Something else that I really liked about the camera and the lighting was that it had this ability to sort of control the chaos in these images. Which I thought was really interesting. And then this image was actually the very first image I ever shot with a 4x5 camera, which is a very exciting point in my career, we'll say. I started with a 4x5 field camera that the school lent me. And it sort of took me a while to get a hang of it, but when I did, I just fell in love with film. I think that the switch to film became really important in my process. Mainly, again, like I've said before, I tend to be a very impatient person, and photographing with film tends to force me to slow down and be a lot more considerate of what I'm shooting. So I think that's really important. I definitely wouldn't say I'm anti-digital at all. It's just, I think for certain projects, it's just the best fit for me. After I graduated, with my BFA honors, which was in 2011, I traveled to Iceland for a little while. I basically wanted to try something completely new. I'd been photographing for school, indoors for a number of years, and I just wanted to completely switch things around and try something completely new. And especially in a place where I couldn't really control all these factors that I had control of when I was photographing indoors. So I thought a place I'd never been before and photographing outdoors would be perfect. So I brought my medium format camera, my Mamiya RZ67, with me to Iceland, and a heavy camera to lug around, but I know it could have been a lot worse. I could have brought a 4x5. But it's an amazing place. It's so beautiful. It was a really great experience. And these are just a few of the photos that I have from there, just to kind of give you an idea. So instead of photographing humans interacting with the built environment, I wanted to start photographing human interaction with the natural environment. And I think that this sort of series of work was more of just a personal exercise for me. I never really had a show with these photographs. Nothing really came of them, but it was just an opportunity for me to explore something completely different. Again, just an exercise for me. And all of these images that I took, I actually brought with me to a residency that I did at the Banff Center. I did a self-directed residency for 5 weeks there. So it was about a month after I returned home from Iceland, I went to Banff, the Banff Center. So yeah, I spent 5 weeks there. I used the facilities to scan the film that I had, take advantage of their great facilities. After I graduated, I really didn't have access to a lot of the things that I needed, so going there provided me with that opportunity. So that was really great. Met some really wonderful people. And then I also did a bit of photographing when I was there, and this is one of the examples of that. They had drained the pool just before the winter break, and so they let me go in there and do some photographing. And this photo, for example, illustrates another interest that I had at the time, which was the interest that we have of bringing the outdoors indoors. And I thought the contrast of these sort of wintry pine trees and then this sort of indoor tropical environment with these small little house plants was really interesting. And then I traveled for a little while, and then in April of 2013, Colin Zip, who's the director at Platform, invited me to show some work as part of his One Night Stand Gallery, which is a Winnipeg-based nomadic gallery that shows work just for one night, and it changes location. And I happened to have a show in a photographer studio just on Donald Street. And I had accumulated a lot of work at that time that had sort of dealt with this idea of bringing the indoors outdoors, and that's what I used for the show. And this was one of the images in that show. And this is another one. This one, I believe, is somewhere on the campus at the U of M. I think it's St. John's College. And this was also included in that show. And I'm sure a lot of you know this image. It's a mural in Fort Garry Place Mall. Okay, so then I spent a little bit of time after that just traveling, and then I was accepted into a summer residency at the School of Visual Arts in New York. So I went to New York for 3 months, and I had the intention, when I went there, I had the intention of photographing human interaction with the urban environment, something I'd never really looked at before. But I found it really challenging, and I wasn't able to really find what I was looking for. So Anne Weathersby, who's a really well-known photographer, she was a faculty member there, and she suggested some readings to me that I might sort of spark some inspiration or help me figure out what I was going to photograph. And one essay that really struck me was Of Mother Nature and Marlborough Men by photographer Deborah Bright. And in it she stated, whether noble, picturesque, sublime, or mundane, the landscape image bears the imprint of its cultural pedigree. And it reminded me of all these wealthy neighborhoods that I had noticed in New York and neighboring states when I had been traveling in Pennsylvania recently. And so I decided to drive out of the city about once a week and photograph in the Hamptons and New Jersey and Pennsylvania in some of these really wealthy neighborhoods. And I became really interested in how wealth was transforming and shaping the residential landscape in these neighborhoods. And I thought it was actually really funny and kind of strange. The majority of these people had gardeners or landscapers, and they weren't really doing it for personal pleasure at all. It was all really just for show. There are a lot of these instances where they were actually completely demolishing the landscape only to sort of build it back up, and I thought that was really interesting as well. So yeah, I would rent a car about once a week for about 2 months and go photograph. I would actually research these addresses either through the suggestion of friends or faculty, but mainly through real estate websites. So you can put in how much the house you're looking for is worth. So I put in something ridiculous like $2 million or more, and then it would give me an address, and I would plug that address into my GPS in the rental car, and it would take me to these really amazing neighborhoods. And I would always photograph from the street. Never really had any problems. No one really said anything to me. And I definitely don't think that this series is finished. I only had 2 months to work on it, and I'd love to go back and keep exploring it. I definitely feel like it's site-specific. There's just something about these neighborhoods that really stood out to me. So something that I would like to continue on in the same area. Okay, so then I started my next series of work, and I'm using this sort of as an example to kind of give you an idea. So I went to the International Center for Photography, and I saw the exhibition, What is a Photograph, in New York. This is just a little while after doing this residency and doing that curated landscapes series. And it's a show that really explores the limits of the medium of photography and asks the question, what is a photography? What is photography? Or what is a photograph? I'm so sorry. And seeing the work of artists who are challenging these conventional ideas about the medium was really reinvigorating, and it provided me with inspiration to make some new work. Some of the artists that were highlighted in the show, for example, are Marlo Pasquale or Owen Kidd. And I think one of the most striking images for me was Marlo Pasquale's image there. And then Owen Kidd, who creates these durational photographs, which are these video works that run for like 4 to 6 minutes, and they're very still, except maybe one little piece of the image actually moves. And again, it just sort of challenges the idea of whether or not that is still considered photography. And at that time, I felt unfulfilled with my traditional practice, and I really wanted to feel physically involved in my work. I really just missed having my hand and building something. So I came up with this idea of starting to photograph houseplants, which is an object that you've seen in my work before and something that I've always been really interested in. Again, this idea of bringing the outdoors indoors. And so I purchased some houseplants at IKEA, took snips of houseplants from friends and family. The Buehler greenhouse, actually at the University of Manitoba, provided me with a lot of leaves, which was really nice too. One of the reasons I chose leaves was because that they are convenient and available all year round. I'll go to this image here. But then also a time-based reason, which I'll discuss in a minute. So basically what I did was I had these plants, I snipped them off. I would photograph both sides, and then I would print them to scale on an inkjet printer, glue them and stick them together, and then I would just create these compositions on black mat board. This is one that you can see downstairs, and this is just another view of it. So then once I had these pieces, I just created these compositions on the black mat board. It's really hard for me to say where the ideas for the compositions came. I really just sort of, once I'd printed out the pieces and stuck them together, I just kind of played with them, see how they would bend and move, and sort of based compositions based off of that. And I think with this work, I really just wanted to find my place in contemporary photography. I've considered myself a really traditional photographer who uses, film, and I just want to try something really new. And then the objective of this work really is to preserve the function of photography and even references to historical practices while incorporating them into a contemporary practice. So I'm using photography traditionally to capture a moment and preserve it in time, while the two-dimensional physicality is challenged and disrupted by recreating the photograph as a spatial experience. And then conceptual ideas about growth in time are explored with the use of a camera and representations of plants, because outside of the work, these plants, unfortunately, they've all died because I have actually cut them off. And so it's really interesting to me, again, the use of a camera to preserve something in time. It's like if you take a photograph of a person, that person will change outside of the work, but in the photograph, they will always be preserved at this one moment in time. It's definitely been a bit of a challenge as an artist who's always thought in 2 dimensions to start thinking in 3 dimensions. Up until now, I've only ever given a viewer one perspective, and now I'm giving them multiple perspectives, which is a bit challenging. And I'm still a little unsure as to where this project will take me, but I keep thinking about bringing it back into 2 dimensions. Somehow, photographing these 3-dimensional sculptures, perhaps. I'm not too sure yet. I keep thinking about Thomas Demand's work. I'm not sure if everyone here knows Thomas Demand. I'm sure Lisa's told you about Thomas Demand. He builds these really amazing paper sets, and then he photographs them. And I keep thinking about that, so it's maybe what I'll end up doing too. But This is just a different angle of that previous image. And I should add that all of these plants were photographed with a digital camera. I did not use film for this. And I think that's it. That's my last slide. Yeah.